Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us for another VES-Artex Academy webinar. Today, we're going to be speaking with Kristy Campbell about milk quality. It begins in the back of the barn. So Kristy's coming from DeLaval, and we're really grateful that you joined us today. I'm going to turn the floor over to you in just a second. If you have questions, you're able to answer them or ask them at the bottom of the screen. There's a section there. You can also do it in the chat feature. We'll be answering questions towards the end of the presentation, and we're looking forward to speaking with you. Kristy, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. So as I was introduced, my name is Kristy Campbell. I am a Dairy Advisory Manager for DeLaval, and I was asked today to talk about milk quality. And the title of my presentation today is Milk Quality Begins at the Back of the Barn. And some of you may have heard that title and question that, especially coming from a DeLaval representative. But we're going to get into how I believe in this and the strategies that I use to help solve milk quality. But before we kind of get into that, I'm going to spend a few moments kind of talking about myself and my background so that you kind of understand my progress of learning or my progress of maturing through my professional career, and talk a little bit about my approach to solving milk quality problems. And then I'm probably going to spend most of the time talking about how do you actually achieve milk quality results in a barn environment. So I'll start with where I started. My professional career began at the University of Tennessee in Knoxville as an extension dairy specialist. And some of you may recognize the gentleman face on the screen. That's Dr. Stephen Oliver. He was a tremendous mentor for me when I started my career. And I was able to partner with him to do kind of a true land grant research extension programming efforts, because Spo's background is, really in the microbiology of the udder and in microbiology in general. So we were able to come together to really look at milk quality from a different perspective. And we were looking at, we had all of this knowledge and all of these answers and all of these recommendations that academia and industry was very well aware of. And we knew, and it was proven, that you follow these recommendations and you would achieve milk quality. But there seemed to be a disconnect at the farm level. And we were trying to figure out, why is, we know this works, but why is it not being adopted? So we started the Tennessee Quality Milk Initiative. And then before I left the University of Tennessee, it kind of grew into this Southeast Quality Milk Initiative, which you may be more familiar with because that did have a larger impact across the Southeast United States. But to go back to this, so I spent the first decade of my career really focusing on microbiology. And understanding mastitis and the inner workings of how that happens. And then we moved into the bulk tank because that was about the time that we really started cracking down from an industry standpoint on raw milk quality. So that's where I guess my first true learning experience came from. After about a decade at the university, I was able to take an opportunity with a Canadian company called Dairy Check, and some of you may be familiar with Dairy Check. And it truly was it's kind of a simple concept, but it's pretty enlightening, where you take a time temperature recording device and you monitor cooling and cleaning parameters, like throughout milking, throughout the cleaning process. And I was able to work with from small herds to large conventional herds all across the United States and some up into Canada. And it was truly in that endeavor and partnering with milk cooperatives and milk buyers to where we could make a direct link between an equipment deficiency or an equipment failure and the impact on the bulk tank milk quality. And it was more than just, oh, you don't have a hot enough water. It was interesting facts like, an agitator, for example. Most agitators, when they fail, they tend to take several weeks to fail. So as the performance of this agitator is going down, that bulk tank bacteria is going up. So there is a very clear correlation between those two things. And in addition, it wasn't just a deficiency or it wasn't just a failure. that led to milk quality problems. It was actual inconsistencies in milking equipment or inconsistencies in the cleaning equipment that led to milk quality problems. So being able to have that data to really put those 2 points together was a huge learning step in my career. So fast forward a few more years, and I had the opportunity to join DeLaval. And when I started, I began as a milk quality animal health product specialist in the Southeast United States. So I got to come back home to my roots. And through the years and through some changes, became a dairy advisor. But when I started with DeLaval, again, it was that background in the microbiology and in udder health, and then the direct linkage between equipment and bacteria in the bulk tank. When I came to DeLaval, I was really focusing mostly on product profile. So that was typically your teat dips and your chemical cleaning hygiene products. Then that developed into the cleaning equipment and to the milking equipment. But I was really making those links on how the product can impact udder health and milk quality, and not just the product itself, but maybe the usage of that product. Through a few changes within DeLaval and some opportunities, I was able to work almost exclusively with large herds for several years. And then that again added another layer of my learning and foundation, because with large herds, instead of working with just an owner and trying to set goals, I spent more time milking cows as an employee of DeLaval with some of these large customers than I probably ever did in my life. So I spent most of my time in the trenches, working 12-hour shifts with the milkers, working a shift with the barn crew, working a shift with the herd health crew, and all of the employees that make a farm run on a daily basis. And what that exposed to me was a disconnect between what the owner wanted, what their goals were, and what the employee thought the goals were or understood the goals to be. But it also revealed the obstacles that employees run into when they're trying to achieve those goals. So again, that was a whole nother learning experience. And then a couple of years ago, I was kind of pushed out into the robotic world. And I will tell you, I'm still not a robotic specialist. I probably never will be. But one thing that I definitely learned through robotics and milk quality is robotics amplify everything. They have the capability of amplifying all of the good things on the farm, but they also have the possibility of amplifying the deficiencies on the farm. So robotics take all of the best management practices that we know and some of the practices that we can get away with in a conventional barn. And when we move into robotics, we just simply can't do that anymore. We have to do things differently. So the robotic world has been another learning journey of mine. And most recently, I have had the opportunity to become a manager of a team of advisors. So the group that you see on the screen, they're truly the professionals and the hard workers at this moment. But I am surrounded by people with not only expertise in milk quality, but in robotics and in cleaning and nutrition and feeding and grazing management and large herds and reproductive management. So in precision agriculture, so I'm surrounded by a group of people that have very different backgrounds, very different knowledge bases than me. And that, again, is another learning journey to show how creating a team environment and being able to learn from each other and utilize each other's strengths also helps us solve problems, real world problems at the farm. So when I was asked to come and talk about milk quality today, I was like, whoa, that's a big topic. I could spend a semester talking about milk quality. So where do we even start? Do we talk about the latest information that we have about treatment recommendations? Should we talk about advances in the microbiology understanding? Where do we need to start? And I just decided, you know what? I think we just need to boil it down into something simple and actionable. Because even though we've made advances in microbiology and we've made advances in treatment protocols and we've made some advances in management or procedures and equipment, at the end of the day, if we truly go back to the basics, if we truly just take a step back and we start at the beginning, then we can achieve milk quality in 90 to 95% of the cases. So that's kind of where I really decided that I wanted to focus today, was let's go back to the basics and let's talk about how can we, as individuals that may be, you may be a producer, you may be a consultant for farms, and whatever your role is, how can we help our customers and help dairy producers of the world achieve their milk quality goals? But the first thing we have to do, we have to define what is milk quality. I don't know how many people we've got on today. I think there was a couple of hundred registered or so, but if I polled 200 people and said, what's the definition of milk quality? What's your definition of milk quality? I'd probably get a couple dozen answers at least. So first we have to decide, well, what is it? And it really depends upon who you ask. And let's focus on the value chain. So what does the customer consider to be milk quality? Is that different than the retailer? Is that different from the processor? Is it different from the producer and the employee? And honestly, it's those last three that are the linchpin of understanding. And I will say this without a doubt, that if the farm employee's definition is different than the owner's definition, then we've got a big obstacle we have to overcome. So first we have to make sure that those two entities have an agreement on what milk quality actually is. But for today's purposes only, I'm just going to boil it down into two very simple definitions. First is low somatic cell count. Low somatic cell count milk tends to translate into low mastitis rates. It translates into low levels of infection or low levels of inflammation. And in general, it just means we've got healthy cows. So if I have a herd that has an average of 200,000 somatic cells or less, then that's generally a healthy herd. But I'm not going to put a number on that. And I'm not going to say this is good and this is not good. I think it truly depends upon what the goal of the farm is, what the goal of the market is. So we can help customers get to 350 if that's where they want to be. We can help them get to 150 if that's where they want to be. But in general, I'm going to say high quality milk is low cell count milk. The second part of the equation or the definition is low bulk tank bacteria. And I'm not going to get into specifics of standard plate, PIs, LPCs, coliforms, because it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what your definition is. It doesn't matter exactly which bacteria you're looking for. In general, if you have good functioning equipment and low contamination, then you're going to have low bacteria contamination in the bulk tank. So I'm not going to assign numbers. I'm not going to say this is good, this is Kristy's recommendation, and this is someone else's recommendation. I'm just going to say it needs to be low in cell count and low in bacteria count. So the next thing I guess we need to kind of decide is how to approach it, and are there different approaches that are necessary at times? And the answer is yes, my approach does change depending upon the situation. First, the question is was it a sudden change in milk quality? And by sudden change, I mean, has it happened within the last month? Have you had an increase in cell count? Have you had an increase in bulk tank bacteria count? And if the answer is yes, then I am going to start in the parlor. I'm going to start in the parlor with procedures. I'm going to investigate cooling and cleaning. But let's be honest about it. I work for DeLaval. I work for a milking equipment supply and service company. So of course, that's where I'm going to start. If I were a veterinarian and I had a client come to me and said, I've had a change in milk quality, then I'm probably going to start at the cow. If I'm a nutritionist and a client said I have a milk quality problem, then I probably would dig into the ration and what the cows are eating and make sure that they're on a good plane of nutrition and that they are healthy. So truthfully, when it comes to sudden changes, the approach that's taken is going to depend upon who's actually doing some of the investigation. But I'm actually more interested in what I call long-term changes. And in long-term changes, that could be something that's been elevating over a period of months, or it could be a level that was acceptable at one point, but let's say the market's changed. And now if you were happy at 300,000 cell count, but now the milk buyer says you have to get to 200, the situation didn't really change. It was just the requirement change. So to me, that is what I would address as a long-term investigation. And that's the ones that I'm talking about when I say I start at the back of the barn. I'm going to look at housing. I'm going to investigate as much as I can about housing, nutrition, health. I am going to include the parlor and cooling and cleaning, but I'm going to start in the back of the barn. And hopefully I'm not going to be alone in this endeavor. I do want all of the other consultants that are involved to be a part of this investigation, because their world impacts my world, which impacts the customer's world. So a lot of people, when I say that I work for DeLaval and that I usually start in the back of the barn, they kind of look at me like I'm strange, because why would you do that? Why not start in the parlor? And honestly, my answer is this: I have started in the parlor. I spent the first several decades of my career in the parlor. You can make a lot of good changes in the parlor, but if all we're focused on is improving milking procedures or improving the milking equipment, which is simply just the harvesting equipment, then at the end of the day, what we're really doing is we're just band-aiding, and we are not truly gaining long-term success. So now when I'm looking at these situations, what I have found is it's a domino effect, and the parlor is the last domino. So I need to go back into the chain and find the first domino and see if I can stop that domino from falling. So I do truly take a systems approach now. And I'm not the only one. There are several great investigators that I've worked with over the course of career that we have started developing this method of work. But today I knew that I had an opportunity to talk with other people out there that your job is not milk quality investigation. Maybe you are a cow comfort specialist. Well, what does that have to do with milk quality? Maybe you're a nutritionist. What does that have to do with milk quality? And the truth is it has a lot to do with milk quality. So I wanted to take this opportunity to talk with people outside of my normal little bubble of a world of milking equipment to bring up how should we approach milk quality? How should we help our customers achieve success? But I have to throw a word of caution there, because whenever we start, jumping into each other's expertise or into each other's world, there's this opportunity to point fingers or lay blame. And that's not what this is about. I mean, it's very important that we avoid the blame game, but it's also very important that we accept our own deficiencies. I'm proud to work for DeLaval. I think we make amazing equipment, but I won't submit to you today that every installation we have is perfect. And I won't submit to you today that everyone uses our equipment the same way or perfectly every time. But I am able to see that. I'm able to recognize and accept what deficiencies come my way, and then I can address them if I can. So I think it's very important that at the end of the day, all of us, from the customer, the client, the producer themselves, to all of us that surround the customer, to really start working together as a team to tackle not just milk quality, but maybe other problems on the farm. The most success that I have found has been through this team approach. And it's almost commonplace in a large herd world that they do have a team of consultants or a team of advisors that surround them and work together in synergy to develop solutions. But it's not as common when you get into the smaller herd or the mid-sized herd world. And maybe we're missing an opportunity there as an industry to where we could help more people by working together more. And honestly, let's face reality. We design systems for perfection. We don't, undersize stalls intentionally. We don't design a parlor incorrectly and intentionally. We design everything for perfection. We strive for perfection. I can put up a milking procedure poster on the wall and say, this is how we need to milk cows. This is perfection. But the truth is we have to know what the ideal is, and we have to balance for the reality that we are facing today. And when it comes to milk quality, what we're trying to balance is what are our mitigating factors that promote milk quality, but what are our challenges that don't promote milk quality? And can we put more weight on one side of the scale, the side of the scale that we want, than the other? We're not ever going to hit perfection in all things. But if we can find a balance between the two, between the challenge and the mitigation factors, then we can achieve good milk quality on almost all herds. And the last little note before we get into, I guess, the meat of it is we all have to remember cows don't read books. They don't read the instruction manuals. Bacteria, they don't read the instruction manuals either. So we have this list of things that we know this should happen, you know, if A, then B. But when it comes to human beings, when it comes to animals, and when it comes to bacteria, we're not real good at reading the instruction manual sometimes. So even though we know what should happen, we have to be able to bend and flex as reality changes. So let's jump into it. Let's jump into this systems approach and say, okay, let's start with genetics. How the heck does genetics impact milk quality? Well, you're probably very familiar with herd health traits and choosing bulls based upon somatic cell scores. Those have become more common. A lot of dairy producers are choosing for healthier cows. They're breeding for healthier cows. But there's another thing that we tend to overlook, and that is udder and teat conformation. And if you have cows with poor udder or teat conformation, we know that those cows are at a higher risk for mastitis. And we know that there is a higher bulk tank bacteria contamination risk just because of the difficulty during milking. And we know this, and we have been recommending for years to breed for robotic cows, because in a robot cow, we want those teats square up under her, because we know that it makes it easier for the equipment to attach. You know, we used to laugh about the cow that had teats, you know, faced out like this, and you'd have to, you know, put your milkers on one side at a time, and robots just won't do that. So we've been breeding cows to be robot cows. But have we been breeding the same traits for parlor cows? And the answer is no, we haven't been. If you take the cow, the one that's on the screen now, I wouldn't be ashamed to take her home with me. She's got a pretty nice udder. It's a little small, but it's a first lactation heifer. But that's a pretty nice looking cow there. But my question is, from a milk quality standpoint, is as that udder starts to bloom up, as she starts to mature and that udder starts to get bigger, what's going to happen with her back teats? Are they going to start crossing? If they start crossing, now I've got a problem in my parlor. And I will tell you, milkers are pretty ingenious people. Whatever you put in there, they're going to figure out how to milk it. I've seen a lot of interesting combinations of twisting liners or twisting claws around or using the next claw over. I've seen a lot when it comes to how to milk a poor conformation cow. If this cow is what the majority of the herd is, then we have an overall problem. If this cow is just the one of, she's going to work herself out of the herd, because she is at a higher risk for mastitis, because she's a constant liner slip happening. And she's constantly, you know, injecting air into the system and bringing bacteria into the system as well. So if this is just the one of, she's going to work herself out. But if we have a lot of cows in the herd that have udder conformations that just don't promote good milking, then we really need to address this problem. But what about this cow? And you're like, well, that's not that bad, right? Well, notice how those back teats are. The base of those teats are touching. So if the base of those teats are touching, where does the liner go? Where does the head of that liner go? And there's not a liner shell claw combination on the market that can successfully and correctly milk cows that have teats that touch each other like that, or cross teats. Those are going to be constant liner slip cows. I was working with a rotary customer a few years ago who was extremely just very upset because they said that every single one of their cows had a liner slip. They were ready. I mean, the system wasn't working. The liners were terrible. You know, everything's poor. So I go and I help, with the dealership, do some investigations, but all of the settings were right. And I was like, okay, so let's go to the milkers and let's make sure that they're attaching the units correctly. And let's make sure that, they're aligned correctly and we don't have a unit alignment problem that could be causing a liner slip. Well, we did all of that and we still had a tremendous amount of liner slip. And I don't know, I'm going to play this video. I'm not sure if the sound will come through. But this particular cow is an example of one of the cows. And his office was like at 50% of the rotary mark. So for 8 hours a day, he heard nothing but liner slips. And this particular cow, what it boils down to, and what it boiled down to on that particular farm, was that he had a significant number of cows in his herd whose back teats were crossed or were perfectly put together. And I couldn't fix that. I could increase vacuum. I could put probably on a different liner. I could mitigate some of that. I could be more aggressive with my milking, but that was not what his goal was for milking. He didn't want to have an aggressive milking. So I brought in his reproductive guy. I was like, come to the parlor with me and let's talk about it. So we stood there and we watched cows together for a long time. And he says, well, maybe we just need to start breeding for robot cows that have better teat conformation. I said, yes, that will help. And that's what they did. But unfortunately, that's a 2-year, it's 2 years before you're going to see the fruits of that labor. But it is a step in the right direction. So in the meantime, we do have to make a decision, more aggressive milking or live with the liner slips that we have here. So let's move on to kind of another part of this system. And let's talk about hygiene and how does hygiene impact milk quality. And what I mean when I say hygiene, I mean, how clean is it? And what specifically am I talking about? What clean? How is clean? What is clean? How clean is clean? But hygiene in particular will impact udder health, and it plays a role in mastitis risk, and it definitely plays a role in bulk tank contamination. So if you increase that pathogen load, you're going to increase the risk for both of those. But when you're looking at hygiene, how do you measure hygiene? Where do you start? Do you start with the milk filters? A lot of people, that's one of the best ways to say, are our milkers doing a good job? Let's look at the milk filters and see how clean the milk filters are. And if you look at the image, it's on the far right of my screen where the gentleman's holding up the milk filters. Those are really clean milk filters at the end of it. I think it was about an 8 or a 12-hour shift. So I was pretty happy with that. But what about the other two? Is that satisfactory enough? So what about this? This is the one where it kind of makes my head turn and say, should we really be starting in the parlor? I mean, are the milkers really, or even the robot, is the person or object that's harvesting that milk, are they really doing a poor job? Or is it simply the cows are too dirty? That's a question that we have to really deal with. Because if you start with cows, and if you see that, okay, we do have a hygiene problem, how does that impact milking? So let's take the picture of the cow there. How much time would it take you to clean her before you would put the milking unit? If this is in a robot, I'm going to tell you your robot is only going to clean what you set your robot to clean. It doesn't matter. It can't see how dirty that cow is. She's the same as the cow that came in before. If you're in a parlor situation, you might expect, well, I would expect milkers to spend more time on that cow to clean her before they attach the unit. That's perfection. But let's talk about reality for a second. Especially when it comes to larger herds, when we're pushing for performance and we're pushing for speed, do they have the time to spend on that cow? What about a rotary situation? What if we have a rotary that's spinning at 4.5 seconds per stall? Can you clean that cow in 4.5 seconds? She's got 4 teeth, so that's a little over a second per teeth. And to kind of demonstrate how fast that is, let's talk about, okay, look, here's my timer. Oh, you can't see it. But I'm going to say go, and then I'll say stop. And that's going to be 4.5 seconds. So ready? Go. Stop. Could you have cleaned that cow? I can't. I can't do it. So a lot of times if we focus only on the filter itself, then we go to the milker. And we say, you need to do a better job at cleaning cows. And the milker is going to be like, I'm doing the best I can. The milker can only do the best they can. The robot can only do the best it can. So that's an obstacle that the milkers can't overcome. So that's an obstacle that we have to bring to the table to say, okay, this goes to the back of the barn. We need to fix hygiene of the herd. So how does hygiene get like that? Well, it boils down to cow comfort. Cows do a terrible job of explaining to us what makes them comfortable or uncomfortable. But we have developed many useful tools, measurements, and observations where we can determine are cows comfortable or not. This particular flow chart has been around for 20-something years now, and I've been using it my entire career, and it's still valid today. And to go into a herd or go into a barn or housing situation and determine are cows comfortable or not. So if you're not familiar with it, I highly recommend that you seek it out. And when we're designing it, we have measurements, we have recommended guidelines, but remember, cows don't read those books. They don't know that they're supposed to fit correctly in a stall. I've been to a lot of, brand new facilities that looked, by book values, everything was perfect. But when we actually got cows in the facility, it just didn't work. And we had to adjust those stalls after we had cows in there. So you can evaluate existing facilities by simply observation, by counting the number of cows, how many are laying down in the stall, but how many are laying in the stall correctly? How many are laying in a diagonal? How many are laying in the alleyways or laying in correctly in the stalls? How many are perching? So that means they've got their front feet kind of perched up onto the free stall, and then their back feet is standing out in the alley. How many are hanging out in the alley? And then how many are in an eating, drinking, or a socializing behavior? So being able to just go into a barn and count just what are cows doing is a great way to determine or evaluate, do we have a comfortable barn or not? And just a little tidbit of information, for cows that are in the stalls, 80 to 90% should be lying down. If they're in the stall, most of them should be lying down. When you start getting cows that prefer not to lie down, your lameness is going to go up. So there's also a side benefit, not just milk quality, to getting cows more comfortable. There's also other health benefits to getting them more comfortable. So how do you know? Again, you just go look. This is a robot barn. If you're evaluating a robot barn, you can do that just about any time of the day. If you're evaluating a conventional barn, then you need to time your observation between milkings. You don't want it too close to milking. The cows are kind of know the schedule. They're kind of up and moving around more. And you don't want to do it too soon after milking because you want to give those cows time to go to the bunk and then kind of settle down. But you can just observe the barn. And if I look at this picture, I think I see 4, maybe 5 of those cows perching. The rest of those cows are laying down in the stall correctly, or they're eating. So to me, this is a comfortable barn. So what about this cow? Is she comfortable? Well, she might be because she's actually laying in 2 stalls instead of 1 stall. But she's not laying in that stall correctly. So I probably would say that's probably not a comfortable barn. What about this cow? She doesn't look very comfortable to me. And what about this cow? This last scenario, the easiest way that I can explain it to most people is this. Imagine you crawl into bed at night, and every night you crawl into bed, somebody hits you on the head with a 2x4. It's not going to take you very long to where you're going to be like, I don't want to lay down in that bed anymore. And you're going to go sleep on the couch, or you're going to sleep on the floor. Cows will find a place to lay down. If they experience this type of pain or anxiety, stress in that freestall situation, then they'll choose not to go back to that situation. So what I need is I need cows to have enough space. They need enough lunge space so they can lay down and rise up appropriately. I need cows to have enough width so that they are not, feeling confined into their freestall or laying diagonally. I need them to have enough length so that they fit correctly. So their neck rail needs to be located and the brisket needs to be located appropriately. So that's what I need. And I will tell you, as I said before, that if we don't meet the stall requirements, or if it's a loose housing situation, if we don't meet the spacing requirements, cows are going to find a place to lay down, and it's not going to be the place that we want them to lay. It's going to be most likely in an alleyway. And this is a good example of how that can happen. So what's happening here is now these cows are at high risk for health events because they're laying in an uncomfortable situation or not laying. They are at increased risk for mastitis because they're laying in manure. And it increases the risk for bulk tank contamination because now all of that manure that they're laying is now attached to their udder, which we're taking that into the parlor. So what do we do if a cow doesn't fit? And I'm going to submit to you today that if freestalls are older than about 10 years, your cows may not be fitting appropriately at this moment. Throughout my lifetime, we've kind of gone from an average size Holstein cow to a very tall, very framey Holstein cow. And now we're kind of back down. We're breeding for more average size Holstein cows. And I've gone to a lot of farms where the freestalls are older or their barn is older and the cow they have today doesn't fit the barn they built at the time. And it really becomes apparent when you're working with a crossbred herd or working with a mixed breed herd. So you've got Holsteins and Jerseys. So you've got two really good extremes of cow sizes. So if you have a situation where cows just don't fit anymore and you don't make a change to that situation, then you have to try to balance that reality by doing additional management factors. Maybe we have to clean the alleys more often. We have to add more bedding. We have to bed more frequently. We have to groom more frequently. So you have to overcome or overcompensate for that reality. So what do you do if they don't fit? Well, you can modify the existing facility. I've very rarely recommended to somebody that they tear their barn down and start over. But we have had to get a little creative at times of modifying existing facilities to where the cows today fit better or can utilize these stalls better. Again, it's not perfect. We're not going to reach perfection there, but we certainly can improve upon the situation that's in the barn and improve on cow comfort, which will improve herd health and that will improve herd hygiene. And another part of this equation is bedding and how bedding impacts milk quality. And that's more of a comfort part of the equation, but it's also a hygiene and a pathogen load question. So the first thing is we want soft, deep, and sloped bedding. But how soft, how deep, how sloped? And there's a lot of equations for that. But again, you have to basically watch cows and see, are they using it as you want them to be using it based upon how you're bedding today. Should we choose organic versus inorganic? We all can agree that organic bedding has a higher pathogen load. But don't assume that inorganic bedding is pathogen free. Inorganic bedding can harbor pathogens, especially if it's not been cleaned out for several years. And what about moisture content? And this is probably the most evident when we are talking about dried manure solid bedding, because I think we all have to agree it's still manure. It's just how dry can we get it? And it also it's a matter of the drier that we get it, and perhaps the more wear and tear, the more maintenance we have on the equipment that actually removes the moisture. So again, that's a balancing act of how dry do we need it and how dry can we get it. this is actually some pretty old data, but it just goes to show how just coliforms, I mean, this isn't looking at a lot of bacteria, this is just looking at coliforms, how different bedding can impact pathogen load. So even in sand and crushed limestone, we still have coliforms in there. And in fact, we have found that we have plenty of mastitis causing bugs that can survive in reclaimed sand. So again, it's not a matter of pathogen free, it's a matter of can we reduce pathogen load. And the way you do that is keeping the beds clean by grooming them on a regular basis and applying enough bedding, fresh bedding, frequently enough to keep that pathogen load down. So what about ventilation? How does ventilation play into this milk quality factor? Well, I think we all can agree that ventilation definitely impacts cow health. And the thing about ventilation is we have to look at it from a cow level perspective. I've been into a lot of new, beautiful, well-designed barns where we assume that the air just goes straight across. And you think, oh yeah, this will be great, because we kind of checked it when cows weren't in there. And we thought, okay, yeah, we've got good airflow in here. But the truth is, and this is probably most true or most evident in large crossfed barns, that really the airflow kind of comes in waves and it goes up and down. And you can have really good air exchange in one group, but really poor air exchange in the next group or in different sections of the barn. And I even have some customers that, you know, they rotate where their early lactation cows are based upon the time of the year where the best air is. So we really have to be concerned about our air exchange at the cow level. And this is why in a lot of big crossfed barns, you will actually see baffle systems installed, because they're trying to keep that air down at the cow's nose where she's standing and where she's laying. And this becomes even more critical when we're looking at robotic farms, because cows will prioritize ventilation. They will prioritize fresh air, and they will tend to bunch up and they will crowd in areas where they have good ventilation. And if we don't have good ventilation in a robotic barn, we won't have good cow flow in the robotic barn, because those cows are going to seek out the best air, and that's where they're going to want to hang out. Another area where the ventilation and impact of ventilation is very apparent is in loose housing or bedded pack barns or compost barns or whichever design you have there. And if you have cows that are pretty well dispersed among those barns, that's a pretty good sign you've got good ventilation across the entire facility. But if you have this loose type of housing and you have cows that kind of congregate on one end or one side versus the other, then I'm going to submit to you, you probably have better air down at that end of the barn than you do at the front end of that picture. So how that translates into creating a milk quality problem is now we've got a bedding issue going on in the back of the barn, because we've got more manure, more urine, more cows, more moisture, and it's going to become a higher pathogen load. And that's where our cows are going. It's going to be harder to manage and harder to get that dry. So that's how ventilation can also play a role into the milk quality equation. So the other part of this housing that I want to talk about today is heat abatement strategies. So I'm from the South, obvious probably by my accent, but heat abatement's been part of my entire career. It's always been necessary, but you may be from a northern climate and you're like, well, Kristy, we don't really have heat abatement issues. We have cold stress issues. You do. And they play a different part or a different impact on milk quality. But today, let's just talk about heat abatement, because there's a special part of heat abatement, and that's the water that we use to cool cows with. So when it comes to heat abatements, you have to address the areas of feeding, where they're laying down, the holding pen, and in the parlor as well. And what happens when it goes into a heat abatement time period is typically protocols are going to have to change, because you're adding a lot of water into the system. You've got more water in that feed valley than you did before. So how are we going to manage that? But we also have the potential for wet cows. So we have to, if we're doing a back feed line soaker, then we just want the backs of cows to get wet. And then we want the sprinklers off, and then we want the fans to blow them dry. So we need to have that balance and that cycle working appropriately. Because the thing that you don't want is you don't want water to come down a cow's side and then down to her udder, and then that wind up with wet udders in the parlor. But in addition to that, in arid climates, they have a different type of cooling system because cows are out on a dry lot most of the day, so we can't use soakers out there. They have a different type of system. I'm certain there's an appropriate name for it. I can't remember what it's called, but I call it the cow wash system or the car wash system. So there's an area prior to the holding pen that cows go into, and it literally will soak the entire cow to bring her body temperature down. And then she goes into the next stage of the holding pen where she's dried before she goes into the parlor. So when you start putting those strategies in place, now we have to change our cow flow and then our parlor flow as well to accommodate for the soaking and for the drying time. And another area that producers, and we tend to overlook at times, is actually putting air on a cow's back in the bedding area. I know in this particular picture, we have fans that are very directed towards the beds because that's where the cows are. They are laying down and we want the airflow going direct to them. But some people tend to avoid putting those fans at that angle over a cow's back in a freestyle because of the potential to blow the bedding off. And I submit, well, it's more important that we actually cool these cows for their health and production. So maybe we need to change either our bedding type, our bedding frequency, or how we bed. It would be better to change that protocol and actually adopt a heat abatement strategy in those freestall beds than to just put air over the backs of those freestalls. So another part of the equation or part of the system that can impact milk quality is nutrition. And some of this may be obvious and some maybe not, but it does impact health, obviously, but it also impacts cow flow and hygiene. So I think we can all agree that if cows are in metabolic distress, then they have an immune stress. And if you have an immune stress, then you're more susceptible, not just to mastitis, but a whole host of other diseases. So the first part of nutrition is we need to avoid metabolic distress if we can. So I can work with nutritionists in that early lactation time and give them feedback on this is the disease that I see from an udder perspective that's happening that I believe can be contributed to metabolic distress. But it really becomes a part of a bigger picture when we're talking about robot barns. Because in robot barns, feed management, not just the nutrition, but actual feed management plays a huge role in cow flow and in cow movement. And it doesn't matter if you're in a free flow barn, then you need that pellet in the robot to drive cows to the robot to get milk. And if you're in a modified or a guided flow, then it's that partial mixed ration that's in the feed bunk that's going to drive cows through the robot and over to the feed bunk. So if we don't have good management as far as, the type, the delivery, the timing, and things like that, then we're going to disrupt cow flow. And when we disrupt cow flow in a barn, we do put cows at a higher risk for mastitis because they're not going to be milked as frequently as they need to be. And we're going to get cows that tend to congregate. Maybe they're going to hang out because they know, okay, the feed wagon's going to be here in a little bit, so I'm going to hang out here. And it kind of disproportionately gets our barns dirtier. But the other part of this equation is just simply scoring the manure. How loose is the manure? I think we've all been in the barns where we've had some very loose cows, and it's a you kind of have to stand out of the way whenever she goes to defecate. So doing a manure score and looking at how watery the area is another good way to kind of see how is this impacting hygiene of the cows, hygiene of the beds, and how is that impacting milk quality. In this particular picture, this is a robot barn that has an automated scraper system. And they had very loose manure in all of the groups in this herd. And I believe there were 4 different groups in this barn. And so the cows that were on the north side of the barn, where the scraper started, had a better hygiene score than the cows that are on the south side of the barn, because the cows on the south side of the barn had to basically stand or experience about 4 inches of liquid manure going by them every day. And if you look at the cow that's kind of there in the background, and you look at that tail switch, you can see how wet that tail switch gets. And it's also a matter of cows have to walk through this to get into their beds. And it degrades their hygiene. It degrades the bed hygiene. So a couple of things need to happen in this type of situation. The first immediate question that I have is, can we run this scraper system more often than what we're running it today? And the answer is yes, we can. But then that leads to more wear and tear on the mechanics of the scraper system. So again, we have to balance that. The second part of this recommendation is, let's cut these tail switches off. Not the tails, but the switches themselves. And again, that's a good robotic practice that we all recommend, because it's a camera issue, or it's a robot mechanics issue if you have long tail switches. But if this were a parlor situation, I would recommend the same thing. Can we get rid of that long tail that's dragging in this manure? And then the third part of this equation is a conversation with the nutritionist to say, okay, we have extremely loose manure, and this is how it's impacting cow hygiene, and this is how cow hygiene is impacting milk quality. So again, it's a systems approach, and getting multiple people involved to try to solve just one problem. And now let's get into some milking equipment. How does milking equipment, or how does product impact milk quality? Well, again, it's health, contamination, and incubation. And I submit to you that if you have a properly designed, installed, set up, maintained, and operated milking system, it's not going to contribute to poor udder health. It's not going to degrade the milk quality from the time it's removed to delivery. And it will be easy to clean and sanitize, and it will be easy to repair in case there's a failure. But again, this is perfection. This is what we're striving to get to. And unfortunately, we don't live in a perfect world. And this cow is pretty evident. She didn't read the instruction manual either. She decided that was probably the most appropriate way for her to ride around that rotary that day. She was just as surprised as the rest of us, I believe. But I want the milking equipment to be perfect. I want the products to be perfect. I want them to run and operate perfectly, but they don't always. So again, it's a balancing act of how do we promote milk quality in the parlor? Well, I guess one of the first questions that we have to ask is, okay, do you prefer aggressive milking, or do you prefer gentle milking? Are you going to prioritize speed, or are you going to prioritize teat health? And depending upon where the priority needs to be, what can we do? If we're going to prioritize aggressive milking, and we're going to say we want a higher vacuum, or a more aggressive pulsation, can I use a more gentle liner? Can I use a shaped liner in place of, to try to balance out that and try to promote good teat health? And when it comes to teat health, it's not just a matter of teat end condition, which teat end condition is important. It's also important to look at teat skin condition. What are we doing to promote good teat health? Are we using the appropriate products? If I have teat end issues and I can do something mechanically, I can fix that. But I can also use products with higher emollients to help, or perhaps exfoliating properties that I can try to clean off those teat ends and teat skin. And the reason why that's important, why do we need soft, supple teat skin and ends, is because all of those cracks, all of those crevices, and those hyperkeratosis teat ends harbor bacteria, and it's harder to clean. So all of that bacteria winds up actually in the milking system and in the bulk tank, but it also increases her risk for mastitis. So we want to promote good teat health. And I'm also going to look for irregular vacuum fluctuations, or liner slips, I guess is the more common term. And I'm also going to investigate the milk path that's there. And Is it something just as simple as maybe our hoses are too long, or maybe they're too weighty, or they're just not maintained in such a way that it promotes good unit alignment? So I'm going to investigate that milk path. And I'm also going to look into the cleaning aspect. And can we clean the milk soil, the milk load out of this system consistently, the same way every day, every time? And beyond that, once I look at all of the pieces and parts, then I'm actually going to start working with employees. I'm going to start looking at what are they doing? What are their protocols and procedures? What's the feeding protocol? We know that cows need to stand after they come out of the milking parlor or after they come out of the robot. We need them to stand because we know that it takes 20 minutes to 2 hours for those teat ends to close up. And if they go lay down, then it's going to increase the risk for mastitis, especially if we don't have good bedding management. So do we have cows that are coming back from the parlor or coming out of the robot to an empty bunk? And we always say we need to, make sure we have fresh feed there, but perhaps it's a timing issue with employees. Maybe it's just the timing factor. We need to find a different way to do things. What's the bedding protocol? How often are you grooming stalls? If it's a conventional barn and it's a 2X or a 3X barn, then you're probably grooming them 2 or 3 times a day. If it's a robotic barn, you might be just doing that same 2 or 3 times, but can you really get a robotic barn groomed well just 2 to 3 times a day? And I say, no, we can't. Because if you're in a conventional barn, all the cows are gone. And they all go to the parlor together, and then they all go to the feed bunk together, and then they all go lay down together. But when you're in a robot barn, cows are doing whatever they want, whenever they want. So you're not always going to have those empty stalls. So there's, you're always going to be trying to, you don't want to get cows up to groom the stall. So you're always going to have those stalls that you miss. So I think in a robot barn, we actually need to groom more often. But how often are we adding new bedding there as well? Is it enough? Do we need to do it more? Do we need to add more, or do we need to do it more frequently and add less? So that's another thing that we may have to investigate is that bedding protocol, and is it appropriate for today? Same thing with the barn cleaning protocol. Again, if you're in a conventional system and you scrape while cows are gone to the milking parlor, then you scrape based upon that schedule. What about automated systems? Can we run them more often? Do we need to run them more often? Or a flush system, can we flush more often? And we also need to have some understanding that as the dynamic of the pen changes, we also have to readdress these protocols. So if, let's say, we overcrowd a pen, then we're also going to have to change our feeding protocols because we're going to have to add more. We're going to have to change our bedding protocol because we have more pressure on those beds. We're going to have to change our cleaning protocol because now we've got more manure in the area than we did before. So again, those protocols have to match today's reality. And again, I'm going to look at milking protocols. I'm going to say, are we pre and post dipping? Are we leaving the dip on long enough to actually have a kill time? Are we force stripping? Because force stripping is a great way to reduce bulk tank bacteria count and bulk tank cell count if you're not doing it. Are we attaching the units correctly? Are we wiping? Are we cleaning the teat ends correctly? But also, do we have, is the parlor clean while we're milking? This particular parlor that's on the screen, I'm telling you that parlor always is that clean. It wasn't just cleaned up for a photo shoot. I mean, they keep it that clean. Those milkers are very hygienic, very concerned about the cleanliness of their parlor. But look at the leg hygiene of those cows. So here we have a disconnect. We have milkers that are very concerned about hygiene, but yet we have barn conditions that don't promote hygiene. So when it comes to if we have a milk quality problem, where do we start? Well, again, this situation, definitely go into the back of the barn to work with cow hygiene. And then what is our actual cleaning protocol of the equipment, of the parlor, or of the robot? And are we keeping that equipment clean in between milkings or during milkings? And are we reducing, incubation and contamination of the system? So again, as we come to an end, let's wrap this all together and let's bring it back into this balance sheet. We want to strive for perfection. We want everything to be perfect, but we got to face the reality that it's never going to be perfect across the board. But what we want to make sure we do is that we put more of the weight on the milk quality factors than we do on the challenge factors. You know, can we do a better job of housing and cow comfort and bedding to get better hygienic cows? Can we do a better job at nutrition? Or, you know, where is the give and take within this particular herd? And what can we balance out and what can we overcome? We all want the Milk Quality Award, I think. And the document that I have up here is from the National Mastitis Council that does give out a lot of milk quality awards every year. And this particular document, I've been using it my entire career, so it's got some age on it as well. But it is a tried and true guideline to not just solving mastitis problems, but also you follow this guideline and you can solve most of the bulk tank bacteria count problems as well. And see, and today I've only talked about 3 of these things. I've only talked about the environment, the equipment, and procedures. And there's so much more to that. But anytime that I work with a customer to go in and do an investigation, I bring this with me. And I actually have put it up into a sheet and I've added a couple of more points for each one of them. And I assign risk levels. You know, green is good, like this is really going good. Yellow's like, it could be better. And red's not good. So I go through the barn, and if I have an opportunity to work with a nutritionist or a veterinarian or otherwise, then we go through and we assign risk factors. And at the end of the day, we sit down and we look at this and say, where's all the red? What are our high risk activities or our high risk environments? And then we have to make a decision. Can we change that? Can we mitigate that? Or do we have to overcompensate in other areas? So assigning risk levels is really helpful because it reduces the anxiety of a customer to tell them you don't have to fix everything, but let's figure out what are the things that will give you the most bang for your buck in answering those questions and finding the best solutions. So when I say that milk quality begins at the back of the barn, I truly do mean the very back of the barn. And I think it's so important that we all remember that we all have a common goal. We have a common client, we have a common customer, we have a producer that's looking to all of us to help provide them with the best solutions for them. And it truly is a team effort. And if I have an opportunity to work with a customer and I have the opportunity to bring in their veterinarian, to bring in a cow comfort specialist, their nutritionist, their genetic specialist, and even representatives from their employees. So, you know, maybe the lead milker, maybe the lead person over their barn crew or their cow pushers or herd health crew. I want all of these people at the table so that we can put it all out on the table and say, okay, here's the high risk. How can we mitigate these factors? So with that, I'm going to conclude, but I'm actually, I want to now turn it back to you. With all of the people that are here today, I'm pretty sure that there are a lot of other great experiences out there. So what are your thoughts? What are your ideas? What has worked well for you when it comes to looking at milk quality, perhaps from a different angle than just focusing on the parlor?
Thank you very much. We've had a number of questions come in, and I think your presentation has been really comprehensive, and we've hit on a couple of them. So I'm just going to highlight a couple here.
Okay.
One of them was,
and before you start, could you speak a little bit louder? I'm having a little hard time hearing.
Any better?
Yes, that's great.
Okay, sorry about that.
That's okay.
So like I was saying, we've had a number of questions come in, and I believe that you've covered them in your webinar because this has been very comprehensive. So thank you very much. One of them was, can you be specific about the role of the veterinarian in improving milk quality?
Yes, so I'm not a veterinarian, right? So I cannot, and I do not recommend specific treatment protocols. And there are advances in knowledge of when we should treat, with what specific bugs and with what specific antimicrobials, and when we shouldn't treat. So I think from a veterinarian standpoint, when it comes to milk quality, it's a matter of udder health, but it's also a matter of bulk tank milk quality. to be that partner in understanding what is the microbiology that's happening today. You know, specifically, like I would lean onto a veterinarian to say, okay, let's do some bulk tank cultures. Let's figure out what specific bacteria we have going on in the bulk tank. Do we have contagious mastitis within the herd? And if we do, okay, what are we going to do about that? Or if we have a certain other type of environmental bug that's prevalent in the herd, what can we do about that? We can do a lot of prevention, but what I can guarantee you is that every time we make a step forward in prevention and we reduce overall pathogen load and we reduce, let's say, contagious mastitis, then we typically see a rise in another type of pathogen that can cause mastitis. So having the veterinarian at the table to really help us interpret and understand the different mastitis pathogens and how we can not just prevent that, but then, okay, how do we treat that if we do have that infection occur? So I do lean on our veterinarians very heavily, for sure.
Excellent. We are a little over time. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pass the questions on to you after the presentation and ask that you maybe connect with people one-on-one. There's a lot of really positive feedback too, so I'd like to share that with you as well.
Okay, that'd be awesome.
To everybody who's asked, we will be providing you with a recording of the webinar, and we invite you to sign up for our email list, and we'll send you information on upcoming webinars. So thank you, Kristy. This has been really informative. We appreciate it.
Well, I greatly appreciate the opportunity to come today, and thank you everybody for joining us today. I'm very humbled by the experience and the request.
Excellent. Thank you very much, everyone. We hope you have a wonderful day.
All right. Thank you.